That is right.
Yep, today.
Okay, I'm calling the Wednesday, August 30th, 2023 Code Review Task Force meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. The clerk will please take roll.
Sarah Albrecht.
Here.
Vicki Anderson.
Here.
Heidi Gillis.
Here.
Donna Jensen.
Here.
Golden, I'm not even, thank you.
Yeah.
Andrew.
Here.
And Patty Stockwell.
Here.
We will note for the record that Basil Farah, Richard Payne, Joshua Walls, and Shelley Ward are absent tonight.
Okay, we do have quorum. Members of the public may attend in person or participate online at zoom.us/join. Meeting ID 837-3129-5489. Once you log into the meeting, please use the chat feature to tell the moderator if you wish to speak to an item. More information is available on the agenda packet on the city's website. Now on to the agenda. Item 1 is the adoption of the agenda. City Clerk, do staff have any changes to the agenda?
Nothing from staff.
Do any task force members have any changes? May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Motion.
Can I get a second? All right.
Second.
Moved by Donna, seconded by Godin. All those in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Second motion is the approval of minutes. Does staff have any changes to the minutes?
Nothing from staff.
Do any task force members have changes? May I have a motion to approve? All right, and a second?
I'll second.
All right, moved by Donna, seconded by Sarah. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, item 3 is to review outstanding items. City staff, are there any updates or outstanding items?
At the last city council meeting, the city council did consider Title VII, the recommended changes from this body for Title VII. At that time, they did ask for 2 specific sections to come back to this group for another review. Staff are trying to look at possible changes to fit what the council was expecting there, and it should come back to you next month.
Okay. Can you give me a high-level overview of what sections those were?
So it was specifically the definition of junk vehicles, and also there was a section on composting.
Okay, excellent. Exciting times in Bridgeville. Item 4 is review Title VIII Public Ways and Property, which is continued from the July 26th meeting. The title was included in the meeting packet with staff's suggested edits. I plan on, well, do you think we should go through the edits? We typically only go through the edits before final review.
Nope.
I think that, we'll make it quick. So starting on page 12, accumulation prohibited, so we're just looking at the changes in yellow. That was removed. Moving on to page 14, you can see that critical root zone has been given a definition. On page 16, you can see that there's some clarifying language on fees and penalties around the destruction, the prohibition against harming trees and the city's right to seek equitable relief to prevent ongoing harm. Page 17, we see the changes around any person owning or occupying private property boarding on any right-of-way shall prune trees, plants, or shrubs on their property or on adjacent right-of-way. And see a removed description for disease and infected trees, because I think that was somewhere else. On page 18, we can see that publishing a notice in a local newspaper is no longer sufficient. On to page 20, you can see height specification clarified for house numbers and for commercial establishments. On page 22, the activities regulated, you can see that tents and temporary structures that are enclosed in the ground anchored in the ground are larger than 10 feet by 10 feet, require
Chair,
a permit.
let me interrupt here for a second. These, the additions to the parks were new additions by staff, and we have a parks representative here too today,
Okay.
because I know last time there were a lot of questions.
Okay, so just in the park section?
Is the new.
Okay.
Yep, everything else was per task force
Thank you.
recommendation.
Thank you for that clarification. So the two big changes to note are that a tent or temporary structure larger than 10 foot by 10 foot requires a permit, and the use of a public address system also requires a permit. Any questions or comments on that?
I have a question or comment on, not necessarily on these corrections, but something else. I don't know if this is the right time. On 822, page 14, we talk about
Page
right of
14,
way.
you said?
Huh?
Page 14, you said?
Page 14.
Okay.
No, we talk about right of way. How do we, how do we know what is the right of way? Is this in the maps, or what's the reference as to where the right of way is? How do somebody know that?
Cole, would you like to?
Yeah, it's on record of the city's right of way. It's an interest that the city has for the roadway. So
It's in the maps only? That's how it is defined?
yeah, it's on record. Yeah, so it's
Record-
available.
Record means written record or a map, or where is it?
Yeah, right, correct.
So
Should
like
we-
the plot record for the city would have it?
Should we refer to that here? It can be found or someplace, because somebody reads that. I'm just asking whether there should there be a, so I'm reading it for the first time, and I saw the right of way and I know what it is, but how do somebody know, where's the definition of the right of way, or whatever you want to call it? Should we have a cross-reference is my question.
That's an interesting point. I don't see that it would hurt if we were to clarify that how someone could go figure out what the right of way is. Of course, if someone asked and called the city, I'm sure they would be able to tell them. Does anyone know if the right of way information is, I know it's publicly available, is it publicly accessible on the internet? Jen?
It's on Dakota County GIS, so
Okay.
anyone can go in and see where those property lines are, and it's in your property description. So it's available. The width of the right-of-way varies all over the place, so it's not a defined width, but it's mapped.
Okay.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we have been avoiding putting things that are, other references to other things in our code because it's out there.
Correct.
So putting, it's on Dakota County GIS is kind of an informal reference to where you can find it, but it's available on our city webpage. You can get access to Dakota County GIS or Dakota County's website.
Sure. People have other
So
opinions? on it?
basically what you're saying is that it's available if you ask the city hall, because it's so complex and it changes from place to place.
It's available on Dakota County's website.
Dakota County website.
Yeah, that's
Oh, it's
the-
Dakota County website, not,
And the
so,
Dakota County has their mapping software called GIS, and it's there. So you could go and look up any property and see where the right of way is.
okay? If I were reading it, I would have liked to know that's available in Dakota County. That's all I'm saying. Should that be made available here for the rest of the readers who runs into this, is my question.
I think our practice has been to not provide specific links because those change often. But I don't see the harm in saying that you can find the information on Dakota County GIS personally.
Because Because if you read this, it'll be say utilized by City of Burnsville. So we'll try to go to the City of Burnsville website.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think we could put a link to that, the Dakota County GIS website, on the forestry page and maybe some other pages too, but just to reference that it's on our city page, because I get that question a lot for boulevard trees, what's the width of the right of way, so I think that's a good point, so we could put it, at least we could put a link on there if we didn't want to put it into the
My point
actual
is
code.
to make it as clear and easy for people to access the information.
Yep.
Cole, do you have any issue with adding annotation right below the definition of right of way that says that the boundaries can be found on the Dakota County GIS system?
The GIS system isn't always up to date. So if we're actually looking at the property records, we have to kind of take a closer look depending on the circumstances. So I think you could include language that's a little more references access to city materials, the city website or something like that, that the GIS could be linked, but that could also specify that a closer search can be conducted if necessary to find to look in the county property records.
Is that an action item we could give the city to come up with friendly language that would help aid the reader and not be too onerous to try to maintain?
Is that to be added to the definition of right-of-way?
I think that would make sense, right below
So
it
too, yeah.
as a note.
I can help with that.
Thank you. Did anyone else have questions on changes that we've discussed so far?
I do actually, I have a comment on, I believe it's 825, so
What page are you on?
on page number 17.
Thank you.
So the highlighted part where it says their property or on the adjacent right-of-way. So this paragraph might give somebody the impression that they are responsible for maintaining trees that are in the right-of-way, but that's not the case. The city's responsible for that. So that might just take a little bit of rewriting or rewording it. I don't know if anybody else reads that, if they also read it that way, but it might be a little bit confusing.
Why did we add that last time?
Yeah, we had a big.
I understand on their property piece.
Yeah.
I don't recall why we added on the adjacent right of way.
I think the intent is if there's a private tree and it's growing into the city right away, we want to be able to have the property owner be able to prune or remove, the branches away from the actual right of way and not necessarily within the right of way, because that's what we're responsible for. But I think that was the intent, and that's why it was added.
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit confusing because if the tree or the shrub or bush is, if it's planted or if its base is on private property, but then the limbs and other things are growing into the right of way and it's blocking a street light or a sign, we want the homeowner or the property owner to be responsible for trimming that. But if the tree or shrub itself is planted in the right of way, then those are the city's responsibility. So it's a little confusing of if the shrub is on your property or growing into the adjacent right of way or something. I don't know how the wording might be, but we do want them to trim things that are starting from their property and growing into the right of way. But if it's actually planted in the right of way, that's the city responsibility.
So I think the problem is on the adjacent right of way.
Yeah, it's more like it's more like if it's growing into the adjacent right of way, that the homeowner is responsible for trimming that. But I think when it says on their property or on the adjacent right of way, you could get the sense that something that's planted in the right of way, that's maybe blocking a street light, that the property owner is responsible for that as well.
Am I correct to say that the homeowner does own the entire property, including the right of way? The city just has the right of way.
The right of way is an easement, so the right to be used in that way.
Right, so possession is the homeowner's. So if we were to say that any person owning or occupying private property, boarding or any street right of way shall prune trees, plants, or shrubs on their property. So that would include in the right of way that's on their property. They would be responsible to do that so that streetlights and passage of pedestrians or sidewalks, traffic signs is not obscured.
That, like, your property, your real property is that is bound on your deed. And you are responsible to maintain those markers through certified people, through land surveying, engineering of private companies, not of the city. And those markers, those identification pins, the iron pipe that they usually use give where the right-of-way are on there. And everything in that's your property, but you do not own that little bit of land. If there's little grass there, whether it's 15 feet, 20 feet, 8 feet, 0 feet to the curb, you do not own that. That is the city's, that is the right-of-way.
Is that correct, Cole?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do we like to write it to make it more clear?
You know,
Go ahead.
I think if I understand right, see, on their property, including the area ceded to city as, you know, the, what do you call that, for the ceded, or I don't know, what do you call the easement given to the city. So it's your property, but the easement is to the city. If you can put that in one sentence, then wouldn't
You are
that make
still
it clear?
responsible to maintain that is what we need to
Right.
say, but when it comes to trimming the trees, that's what we're also saying is we'll take that responsibility if it's planted in that area. If it grows beyond it, then we
So
trim
maybe
it.
it's the language of over the right of way versus on.
Right,
Or
over,
extended to, something to that effect, so you understand, because I get it 100%, because you don't want everybody to just say, oh, it says, hey, okay, and they don't want to pick up the leaves or whatever, next thing you know, you got a tree 30 feet up, no branches.
Could we just strike the, or on the adjacent right-of-way? Because if it just, okay.
yeah. that's-
Because
I
what
was
I'm
gonna say the same.
reading, any person owning or occupying private property bordering on any right-of-way shall prune trees, plants, or shrubs on their property so that the streetlights, passage, traffic signs, view of any street and alley intersection are not obstructed. Would that
Do we need-
eliminate? I feel like
Eliminate,
that
but do we
just,
need to say branches that, prune trees and branches that hang over, extend over the right of way?
I think prune trees is pretty clear, because it's, if they obstruct, we're not saying they didn't have to prune trees, except that they obstruct streetlights and
Okay.
sidewalks and traffic signs.
And that would be the only reason why we would, make somebody prune their trees. So I agree. I think we just kind of left it the way it was, strike that language. I think it would be
So
fine.
deleting specifically or on the adjacent right-of-way.
yeah, agreed.
Okay. Great. Any other points?
Question on 859.
What page are you on?
59.
24, it looks like.
Alcohol, it's on page 24.
Yeah, 24.
Okay.
It talks about malt liquor. Malt liquor by definition, it does not include beer. So wine and malt liquor is allowed, beer is not allowed. It may read as if it's not allowed.
Isn't beer malt liquor?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah,
I know.
depending upon how you define it, because if you go to the Wikipedia or dictionary, it says malt liquor is something which has more than 6% alcohol or something like that, and beer is usually according to the Wikipedia definition I found.
I think we just go by whatever the state of Minnesota says is malt liquor. Yes.
Oh, City of
And that
Minnesota?
would, so like malt liquor in this, in this definition, using the state's definition, would also include like,
The seltzers,
the,
3-2
yeah,
beer.
the,
Okay, but that's not what I found on.
and that may be, but we just follow whatever the state of Minnesota, how they regulate it.
Okay, thank you for that. Then 873.
What page is that?
Which page?
I think you're into the new
Yeah,
section that we're gonna get to tonight.
Oh, okay, yeah, so that's,
Okay.
that's all I have at that point.
Thank you. Okay, so back to page 23. If no one has any questions about the parks changes in page 22. Moving to page 23. Just see that it requires permission from the city manager or designee. We've talked about page 24. And we see the changes on page 25 around service animals. And the changes regarding restrooms and then other group activities. Any questions? I'm curious about, on page 26, the use of park facilities for parties, public meetings, assemblies, and then for groups of 25 or more, must complete a submitted event application. Why is that? If I want to have my family reunion with 30 people, which I would call a party, why does that? I mean, if we just show up to the park, no one's there, why does the city care?
Garrett.
I would say in these, I think there's a difference between, if you're just gathering for your family gathering versus in these situations, it'd be more of a intent to include the rest of the public, like not just your own little private party situation, right? So this would be, for, we've had groups that want to have large events and whatnot. We need to know about that ahead of time so we can make sure the spaces are prepared and things like that properly, and that you understand what the ordinances are and things like that, if it's going to impact the entire park and the users that are in there. So generally, once you reach a certain number, which has been identified at 25, it starts to impact other folks in the park. And people are usually looking to have music and different types of things that may require permits. So we just want to make sure that they can have a great event and accomplish it, but whatever they're planning has at least been reviewed first.
Okay, and is that, so it's a shall issue, shall grant the application. Seems like it's not really necessary, in my opinion.
Yeah.
If a group of 30 people, my closest friends, want to come to the park, and, of course, we're certainly able to register and say we'd like to reserve a park, and I understand that might not be available if I just show up randomly on a Tuesday and someone else is there. But I don't really see the need for the people to get permission from the city to show up, even if it's more than 25 people. Go ahead.
In places like Cliff Park, there's a few tables or whatever, few things. And we sometimes rent 3 or 4 of them for a larger group, for 40, 50 people. And so each one, is it 25 for each one of those, or 25? If I rent 3 of those, I don't know what you call that, the
Pavilion?
pavilions, because each pavilion is separate, I think. I forget now whether it is or not, but the whole pavilion can can actually seat more than 25 people. So if I rent it, is that included as a application for party for a large group?
I think one of the words that might be confusing in here, and it may be okay to strike it, is the word party. You know, there are, again, the intent is when there is a large event, people are bringing in their own forms of entertainment and require generators and different things like that, and maybe are looking to have a petting zoo or different things that, and we just had one of these recently, and it was like, that's great that there's 200 people that you want to have in the park. Let's review the things that you want to try to do at this large gathering, right? So, yes, we have people renting Cliff Inn, and, you know, it's just families and kids, and they're using the large play structure and the splash pad and whatnot. That's just general use of the park that's open to everyone. This is more when there's new, unique situations that are coming in to the park, is what we're trying to capture. So whatever that wording might be, that, and again, at the end of the day, it's not to prevent them from doing it. We just want to make sure that their experience is a good experience along with the other park users and the adjacent neighbors that may live by a particular park and things like that. So we can say, yes, everything you have scheduled is great, and we know that we have enough garbage cans and different things out there to prepare ahead of time and afterwards, and that the things that you're planning to do meet city ordinance and whatnot, so.
So a question I would ask is, if I wanted to, just as a hypothetical, if I wanted to show up at the park and have a public assembly and read a book out loud, and I wanted to bring a generator and a public address system. Now, am I correct that I can't bring a generator, that that's not something that is allowed in the city code, or is there anything that prohibits me from doing that? I do see there is a spot about you can't have a public address system. And I would assume that I can come and petition and say, I'd really like to have a PA, and that would require a permit. But, I mean, if I can't have a PA, then I guess my point is, if you have a group of 100 people, and they're just gonna stand there and talk, and who cares what they're talking about? Why does the city care? Because they're not violating any of the other rules. There's nothing that the city needs to know about in particular for them to have the right of it.
There may be some other rules, like with restrooms, when you have an event, even if it's temporary, you have to have so many toilets and accessible toilets available for those guests, and accessible walkways and ways to get from parking lot to the event that you have, even though it seems like it's just whoever, we still have other rules. We still want to know whether we need police or fire or somebody aware that something's happening, so that they're ready to come in and for either rescue or safety, or it's a city use, and so there's just a number there that we put out that tries to flag or instigate, okay, this is usually where we need additional toilets. This is usually where we need, when you have a generator, you technically need an electrical permit for the generator. All generators require a form of grounding that people don't realize, and so can electrocute many people at one time, a simple generator. So
Sure.
it's things like that that get flagged, and what we talk about when we get the permit. It's not to, we usually don't restrict somebody. We're trying to let somebody use it, but we're just looking at the public safety and everything from parking, bathrooms, and other laws that come into place, like with the tents. That's required to have a fire permit, and anything over certain square footage, here it shows 10 by 10. We start looking at exiting and flammable uses like candles and things that are used, we're not allowed to use them in there. You have to use different things. The fire department needs to review those things. So it becomes a public fire, life, health, safety issue accessibility, and there's just other rules that may not be written here, but there are some laws that come into play.
All of those health safety ones you mentioned make sense, but it sounds like they don't exist because of this section. They exist in spite of it. The fact I can't set up a generator in the park unless I have an electrical permit, that exists independent of this. The fact that I can't have a tent larger than 10 by 10 exists independent of this. And when I go to Crystal Lake Beach and the parking lot's completely packed and people are parking on the side of the road and there's 300 people there, it's not like the city's asked those 300 people to get a permit to show up. So,
If I'm, this section isn't requiring you to get a permit, it's asking folks to submit an application.
that's a permit.
It's not, it basically just provides information to what the event is and what you're hoping to do, which is then reviewed by staff. And at the end, there may not be anything provided back to the individual. It's just, it informs staff and allows them to walk through and say, in order for you to have a great event, everything looks good, go enjoy it, or, oh, you were hoping to have a petting zoo out at your event, and unfortunately, that's against city ordinance, so if we weren't to be aware of that, they may have a really bad experience instead of having a really good experience, just letting us know. So, at the end of the day, as Chris shared it, the intent of the application is just to let us know, what are you trying to do? And then how can we help to make sure that you have a good experience? It's not to say, no, we're not gonna allow this and not issue, there's not an issuance of a permit per se.
I have a question. With the application that's submitted, when you're evaluating it, are you looking at like, are we gonna need extra people to go clean up this? Are we gonna need, I mean, the emergency services, I understand if it's a significant event, you'd wanna have extra, say, fire department staff on hand or ready if something were to occur. See how that would be cost for the city to be prepared for that. So I guess I'm curious what other things like that might be in preparation for an event, because that to me seems like there might be some preparation needed for that kind of thing and needing for notification. And my other question on this would be, is 25 typical of other cities around us? Is there, maybe they're looking at 50 or more? I don't remember what Savage has. I had a birthday party there last year, but we had to do a permit for a birthday party over there for a park, but. So that would be a question I would have, if it's, kind of keeps a line.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, Sarah, so in some, our portable toilets, for example, are cleaned certain days of the week right now. So if we know there's gonna be 200 people out there, it would be helpful for us to give a call to the service and say, hey, there's an event going on, there's no permit required, they're just using the park, but it's gonna be heavily used the day of, and then we're gonna wanna make sure it's taken care of the next day. So yes, I mean, those are different things that, in addition to what Chris shared, that we would just read through it and say, okay, it's great to know what you're doing, and everything looks good, and go enjoy the space, and thank you for including us in what's going on, so.
So 8514 says you have to have a special event application, and the section on special event application says it is a permit. It is a special use permit. So it is a permit. So, and that's what happens when you apply and they permit you, right? It is a permit. I just think that, if someone's gonna come in and have a petting zoo, for example, which may or may not be legal according to city code for who knows what reasons, then they're in violation of that independent. I just don't see why we'd require people to get a permit to have group people in the park, regardless if it's 100 people or 200 people, especially when it says demonstrations or assemblies. I mean, we have a constitutional right to those things. And a park of all places, a public space where people can come and go as they please, generally, I don't see why the city has to care or no. Now, if they want to bring in a generator or they want to bring in a tent, which would be something they'd need to get a permit for, that makes sense. But the fact that 200 of my closest friends are going to come and stand in the park and drink malt liquor, I don't see why the city cares. I'd like to see the section removed.
Yeah, just a side, I think it's Lac Lavon, I think there's a pavilion that accommodates much more than 25. So if you take that pavilion, is that an automatically you get a permit for 25 people or more. So, in my mind, yes, I don't think we need to have a limit for a meeting, because park is where people come and congregate, and sometimes as a group or many groups. So it many groups can be in the park, and that will definitely go much more than 25. It will be in hundreds. We go to a Crystal Lake on a Saturday afternoon or whatever.
I would like to see it stay in here, maybe with some revisions. All due respect to the gathering and all of that. And I'll play devil's advocate just a little bit. Crystal Lake, Lac Lavon, they're big parks. Small neighborhood parks, I live near Colonial Park. If each one of us decided we're all gonna have 25 of our closest friends on Tuesday night gather in the park, we're gonna have a problem. There's not gonna be enough restroom facilities. There's not gonna be enough parking. It's gonna be very disruptive to the neighborhood. And I think that there's gotta be some kind of controls there, just to say, fire safety, health safety, and just crowd control to be preventative of it. Not to deter it, but to have some oversight, and I fully respect that. I don't know if 25 is the right number, I'll be honest. And I don't know, I guess I would want to know more how it lives in conjunction with when you rent a pavilion. Does that supersede the need to do any of this? You know, is it all encompassed in whatever that rental agreement is?
That's a good question. If
This
you get a
does say
pavilion,
permit,
is that
you
a
know.
special event application? If I say I want to,
So, is there a fee to do the special event application?
there may be one, which is what it says statutorily. Is it a matter of practice? That's a good question.
Again, it would depend on what is needed at the end of the day, right? So, a lot of times there would not be a need for a fee. In some cases, depending on what the group is doing and what they're attempting to accomplish, there might be something associated with it, so.
What's a for instance where someone would need to pay a fee?
I'm looking at it right now.
Sure.
I'll have to get back to you
Indemnity
in
law,
a
excuse me.
second, just to be able to provide some examples on that.
I do find that interesting that it varies, because, again, I did a birthday party in Savage, just simply because there was a park that was liked by the kiddos, and they charged a straight fee just based on just the usage. They didn't they asked some questions, but they didn't ask a lot of questions. It was just, how many people, what's the date, what's the time frame, and here's your fee. So I kind of like that there is a little bit of leeway there, you know?
I think the city website has a structure when I've looked for residents, because my community room isn't always available for 50 to 75 people.
Yeah.
So I tell them to go to the website and look and see what parks are available, and there is a fee structure in the city website for those. Because if you want to make sure, you want to guarantee you have use of that building or that specific area, you do need to reserve that for that part of it.
But not if anyone's not there, right?
No, but I've seen it in Lakeville when I've gone to Antler Park, where they had a pavilion and people were using it, and all of a sudden the people that rented it showed up. So the people using it had to go out because it was reserved for. So that's something that needs to be in the language so people understand, hey, maybe it's first come, first served, but there is a reservation process for these locations, which I think Burnsville's pretty good about laying out what that is for their different parks.
I don't think, I agree with you. I just don't think that that's at issue, because people can still reserve if they want to. I mean, I could reserve a pavilion for, myself, if I wanted.
Yeah.
And just stand there and look at all the people who can't come into the pavilion, I guess. So what if we change the number from 25 people to, how about 100? I mean, all of our
Uh,
parks are big enough to hold 100 people standing there, so.
I guess I would be interested to hear, again, what maybe is reasonable. Is there a certain park, maybe that's too many? You know, maybe it's per park, maybe it's 50 or more. You know, again, I have a tough time just deciding on a number without knowing probably some more statistics about the parks and that kind of thing, and maybe you'd have some, if you had
Yeah.
time to look at it, you'd probably be able to come back with something, but.
Well, Sunset Pond would not hold 100 vehicles, no way.
I
And you
didn't
got
say
no
100
street.
vehicles. I said 100 people.
Right,
with
but
people.
you also have to account for the fact that you're gonna have maybe 25, 50, 30 vehicles. It's not all gonna be share ride and car ride. So when you're doing that, that's gotta be taken into account for these different locations.
Right, but you'd agree that if 300 people just wanted to show up to the park randomly, any park, and there wasn't parking, they'd either park there or they'd move on. And if they park there, they're entitled to park on the city streets during the day, unless there's a special no parking zone, but there isn't typically in the city. So there wouldn't be anything stopping people from parking up and down the streets anyways, if they felt so inclined, which you see on Crystal. It's a huge parking lot, but people park up and down the streets because they want to have fun at the park. Go ahead.
I think there are kind of two ways I can look at it. One is you reserve a place like a pavilion, and then you are there. That's a separate thing, as opposed to just be there. So I think in the current situation in Burnsville, it's these numbers or these crowds, unruly crowds, if you want to call it, is self-regulating more or less. Rarely you will get some exceptions, but generally I don't know whether there's I don't know, can you think of some difficulties that we had with groups? Are we making some laws or regulations which doesn't exist? Problem doesn't exist, it's kind of my question.
Yeah, so I think the purpose, and I'll just kind of share some of the things that are on the special event application. It asks the group, are you in need of a public right-of-way or street closure, right? So it's a question to say, have you thought about this? Is this something that would benefit you? We have groups that have closed down 120, areas by Nicollet Commons Park, right? So, okay, if we need to do that, you need to bring in resources, we need to know when it happens and stuff. So it's really a planning process. Are you gonna have alcohol service there? And if so, we'll wanna make sure that you know what the city requirements are, so we can help you get in touch with the right people. Is there a need for police and security? Sometimes, depending on the event, they might want access to that. If it's just a group of 25 people playing Frisbee in the park, they're probably not gonna even, it's not gonna be an issue, so it's like, nope, not necessary, but, oh, yeah, we didn't think about that, we wanna do, it's a fitness thing, and it might be nice to have a paramedic on site to cover ourselves or whatever, right? So just throwing out some examples. We talked about the tents, and if you're putting up large tents for large groups, there's certain things that you need to do and we don't wanna hit a irrigation line or different things like that when it comes to those kinds of things. Talked about electrical, and do they have needs for that? Amplified sound, are they considering putting up a stage, or would there be value to that and what that takes? Food sales, waste and recycling, so again, if it is a large event, there is supposed to be recycling made available at those things, and we can help assist in that process. And so that's really what the application is about. From there, once we know, then we can help them to have a great experience the day or days of the event that they're happening. It's not to prevent them from doing any of the things and whatnot. I can't think of a situation where, up to this point, where we've had to tell someone, no, I'm sorry, that we're not gonna support your situation. That's not what we're about. We're about trying to make sure that people do have a good experience when they're said and done. So that's the intent behind it.
Sounds like event planning, and you're just informing them on all the things they need to consider and make sure that they're kind of getting their ducks in a row.
Correct.
Based on other permits needed or something.
I think the number is partly a sticking point, maybe knowing more from other cities on that and where that came from. And I wouldn't say I would go dramatically higher, on that particular part of it.
Yeah, I would
On
be
that,
interested in
but
a
I think
higher number.
that number, I think, is a sticking point, because I know when families get, yeah, to use my party room, I'm like having to tell them, can you rotate? Cause I can only handle so many for fire code in this room and for parking places, kind of a thing. And I know people have 30, 40, 50, 60 as you go. So that's something to take into effect too for those things that we might not all think about. So I think that number is a good point that you brought up, Sarah, saying, hey, let's look at that.
Go to.
What I thought I heard was that there's a number is one thing, then the use of PA systems or any of those things, equipment, or food or alcohol vending, those are other things. So definitely, I can see that when there's a PA system or food vending or alcohol vending permit. But the number is kind of still, in my mind, I don't know where that should be, because it could be the group that comes together, or maybe they're in a park, being park, a lot of people can come there.
I think what bothers me is the number, and then the constitutionally protected list of reasons why people show up at the park. So what if we just said that if you want to have a space larger than 10 by 10, a tent, or if you want to run a generator, or you want to have a PA system, or you want to do alcohol, or you want to do food vending, or need to shut down a road, it takes a special event application permit. Because then it doesn't, because if I wanted to bring in a petting zoo and alcohol and food, but I was only going to have 5 people, I'd still have to have that permit anyways, right? Because those are the health and safety things I have to obey. So why not remove the purposes and remove the limitation on the size, and just say if you want to bring in a PA system, or you want to bring in food trucks or alcohol serving or XYZ, which we already have enumerated throughout the code already, countless places, because they all say that you can't do it unless you get the permit.
I think I like the idea of limiting the reasons. That makes sense to me, because even if, like, my kid's birthday party, I'm still gonna go look and see what the rules are, because I'm a rule follower. So I'm gonna go say, what do I need to do to make sure this works right and we don't get kicked out, or please show up and say, you're not supposed to do this. So I feel like a party still is valid for a group session type of thing. I think a number is useful in the way of someone coming to the city and looking at, okay, what do I need to do? And maybe this is a first step that they come to and go for any event, larger than, maybe it's 15 people if you want to eliminate all the reasons or something. And then you just kind of broaden it. I don't know. I don't know what that number should be, but I kind of like the idea of a number just because it gives some idea of, if it's going to be, let's say, significant, whatever the definition of significant is, then, the city can help plan that out and look at it. I don't know. That's kind of where
To be really able to help plan, then each location has probably different numbers which can be accommodated in a way. So then you get into, okay, if it is a Lac Lavon, it's this much, and if it is a Cliff Fen, it's this much, and if it is Sunset Pond, this much. So we are getting into a lot of details which.
And I think that's what, if I remember right, I think Savage did that. I think it was so many people and it depended on the park. And I think it's partially to the pavilion or the shelter or something like that. And maybe that's something to consider for Burnsville. Maybe that's part of the categorizing, rather than saying the type of the event. It's what is the capacity of that particular park? And I don't know, how many parks are there in Burnsville again? Maybe there's gonna be.
76.
Okay. So, again, I don't know if there's a way to maybe categorize certain sizes and say, this group of them are, if it's 25 or more for this park, and then it's 50 or 100 or more for the bigger parks, and I don't know.
So what if the language on group activity changed to the use of park facilities in any way that isn't an activity regulated, which refers back to the code, requires a special event permit? Because then the city can, to its heart's desire, put in this list. If this isn't good enough, I mean, if we need to have food trucks and alcohol trucks and, you know, all sorts of things, we could put that in the list of things that require regulation. And then it's just, if you're using the park facility and it's a regulated activity in that list, then you have to have a permit. Michelle?
Sure, and in that train of thought, I was thinking it's possible that we could have a special use permit, a special event permit or application that encompasses all of these things. We don't need to have so we don't have to have a special event application and a tent permit, right? Not two separate things. The special event would cover tents or a loudspeaker or any other type of regulated
fire code
activity.
requires
And
that,
then at that
yeah.
point, you would also get the information about, you know, size of the event, that kind of thing.
The fire code requires this, so it'd be a fire permit, it'd be separate. But I think it's just to inform and get some good communication going of the intended use of that space. That, whether it's
Yeah.
outdoor or indoor, it's a
I'm just trying to
use,
consolidate
yeah.
all the different regulations into one application instead of having to have separate
And
things for
that's
each
what
one.
this does, the conditional, or the,
Special event,
special event one. We all get together and review it, take a look at it. The review is free, then we determine, okay, do we need generator, this, that, the other thing? And then if it's all okay, usually just released and they can go gather, and then they have the proper amount of trash cans and
Sure.
support from city staff to go and clean up or help out or set something up for them, or,
I think a difference from that is the right-of-way permit. If there's a road closure, that can't be included.
okay.
Separate insurance that's needed.
has to be separate for my end of the world, so.
But you guys still, like the special event, application or permit still coordinates kind of all that, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Like,
That is
Probably
correct.
make
That's
it
the
all work
intent
together.
behind it is, yeah.
to make
No.
it easier for them to get it all done.
Yeah, it's $1,500 in escrow for the road closure or something. I mean, there's each one of these different things that, and again, the purpose of it is really to make sure that the organizer has a great event. At the end of the day, we're not trying to stop them, but then there are just certain things that they may need to do. Or if it's 50 people and they just want to stand out there and read a book together, then it's, hey, enjoy your time and
Be on your way.
yeah, yeah. So no need for any additional discussion.
So I think that we have in 853 park hours, it says activities regulated, and these are the following activities that require a permit from the city to take place in parks while the park is open. And I think we could just make a change and say, instead of requiring a permit from the city, requires a special event application permit. And then if we took paragraphs back on 8514, if we took paragraphs subsection A and 1 and put them under special event, to say that after special event, which talks about no person shall have special use unless they do this permit, otherwise it's first come, first serve, that the city manager shall grant it if the use will not interfere with health, safety, welfare, and the city manager may require indemnity bond. So if we consolidated those sections, so the change to B, 853B would just clarify that the permit needed is the special event application. If you got rid of 8514, the first paragraph, and moved A and 1 under 854, special event application, that would tell you everything you know about a special event application, why you would do it, what the process is, and right before it says, here are all the reasons why you'd need to get one, because they're prohibited activities, or regulated activities.
So the only thing eliminated then is just the amount of people, which is kind of like the last piece that we need to figure out if that's
Well, you're,
something that's a qualifier or not.
well, I just went to the parks and I looked up like Element Park, and like the park shelter, the group size is 25 to 30 people. So it tells me, I think when you're able to reserve those, I think each one of those things has, if I'm not mistaken, a group size or window of how many you can fit in that particular shelter, which meets whatever fire code or other safety codes that they have to come into concern with.
Perfect. I think that makes sense, because, I mean, to be clear, I think that if 400 people showed up at a small park, which would be uncomfortable for them, and they're just talking, that's a protected activity. The police aren't going to kick them out. Constellation protected. That they're not breaking any other rules. Do you agree with that on the face of it?
The city can impose time, place, and manner restrictions, which I think is, we're in the policy realm with the discussion about numbers and permitting in this context.
So do you think that the city could say, you can't have 50 people in a park to do whatever? I mean, at the middle of the day and not break any of the rules?
If the city's not imposing, as long as the city doesn't have a, you know, a content-based distinction, they decide to impose a restriction, like a neutral one that says, you know, come into the park for any purpose, get a permit, we've determined that it's reasonable time, place, and manner based off of so-and-so to accomplish so-and-so policy aims, like we're discussing here, then it'd be appropriate.
Okay. So I would move that we alter and I have too many pieces of paper floating around, and so now I've lost it. We alter 853B, which says activities regulated. The following activities require a permit, to change that a permit to a special event permit. And then we just move paragraphs A and 1 under group activity to right below 854, special event application, because that would tell them what they need the application for, what the process is, and what are the regulated activities that they would need to be concerned with. Would someone like to second that?
Second that.
Okay. Do we want to have more discussion on so again, I think I got my pieces of paper here, correct. So we're gonna alter the one word where it says permit and say special event application permit or special event permit. And then we're just taking the paragraphs from A and 1 under group activity and putting them right under special event application in 854. The first paragraph that talks about the reasons that you'd be using it or how many people would no longer be there.
The only thing I would still want to consider is the size of the group. Just in that, like 1 through 5 there in the B, under 853B, the 1 through 5. You know, I know that it says it requires a special event permit, so the only thing missing is the size, and I think there should be some consideration for just the size of the group that's planning to be there. If it's a sudden thing and everybody decides to get together, I get that, you know, and I think, you know, the authorities and that kind of thing will become aware of it if they become a nuisance or something and do measure, you know, so I think if they're planning something now, I think there still should be some consideration for that size of the group. That's the only thing that I would.
How about if we have that number of people, expected people in the application form, that will give an idea to the city as to what need to be done.
Yeah, but if we don't list it here, then that's not part of the requirement to actually do a special event permit or application.
What I'm saying is it's not a requirement, it's an information for the city to manage health.
But if we don't list it in the code, then they're not required. I mean, if they just plan to do a group event and it ends up being 75 people that they're planning on, and they don't need, they're not gonna sell food, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's fine, I don't know.
I feel like there needs
Feel
to
like
be a
there's
number
something.
there too, though. I mean, as a consumer of the parks, and if I want to have an event, you know, where is my trigger to say I need to do this or not, to go for that special, you know? Because to your point, if it's me and 23 of my best friends, I know I'm okay, but if, you know, a couple of you guys are gonna join, then I'm gonna need to go on the site here and take care of this. So I do think, and what the right number is, I don't know.
Yeah,
25 feels low, 50 feels high, you know, and if they're, and I agree, it needs to be on part of that application too, so there's an awareness when it's sent in. But I think just guidance, you know, in the community for when they're planning, birthday parties, you know, the kids' birthday, you know. My kids were pretty popular. I don't know, 25, you know, I'm not sure when I would have needed to get
It
that,
multiplies
so,
quick, and then the
Right.
siblings come, and then.
right.
So a question I would ask is, I understand the concerns, I think I understand the concerns about the number of people, but if 1,000 people show up at Crystal Lake Beach and they're just there enjoying the beautiful weather because it's nice out, the city's not gonna come regulate them and say, whoa, half of you gotta get out of here because it's a park. And so,
Is there capacity at every park? Like, I feel like at some point, there's gotta be some limitation where they're like, I feel like there's gotta be capacity. Like, they should almost stop.
Yeah, to
Michelle?
me, that's self-regulating. If there's just too many people, you just don't go there.
Oh, no. They don't, sorry, they don't necessarily self-regulate.
Well, it's in situations like parks, but some of the conference rooms or rooms, that's a different story.
sure, because that's a health and safety thing, but people
That's a
standing in a
health and
field.
safety thing, that is required for that. But then you should make a poster in each park, only allowed 500 people, whatever. That will be,
So is this special event for anybody that wants to have that large of a group in a park, regardless if you're reserving a place or not? It means if you're gonna go and have a party there, is you're reserving the place, or is this anybody planning to go to any park then with a larger group?
Michelle?
My understanding was that if you're reserving and you get more than so many people for an event, then you'd have to switch over to the special event permit on top of that, regular park reservation.
So it's people looking to reserve a place in the parks?
Not necessarily, but I mean, like you said, if people just spontaneously show up, then there's no regulation to that if they're not violating any of the rules. But I think this 8.5.14 that talks about the 25 or more people is specific to planned events. If you're planning an event in the park, that's when we want to have that special event permit, not just you spontaneously take 30 of your best friends to the park.
Sure, but if I tell my friends and I send them a text and I say, meet me at the park, that is a planned event. I have conspired with my friends to show up at the park.
Whether it's 15
For the
minutes
most
beforehand
literal
or-
definition. I
Yes, for the
agree.
most, or if I put it on Twitter and I say, hey, great, we're gonna all be here. I mean, again, why does the city care? If they're not breaking a health and safety rule, because they're not using generators, they're not shoving 800 people in a bathroom, why does the city care?
Donna, if I may, and, I guess to start with that, the reason the city cares is we want to make sure that the people who want to have the event in the park have a great experience, right? That, the application, again, is not to regulate or tell them not to. It's, hey, if you haven't done something like this before, or now that you're doing this, the last thing that someone who's putting on a group event wants to have happen is that the neighbors call the police and they have to deal with that. Like, if we can preempt all that and help them with the planning process, that's the purpose of it, right? So, you know, if someone wants to reserve Lac Lavon Park, that shelter holds 100 people or whatever, it's going to be, in that case, they want exclusive use of it. So they're going to need to reserve the shelter and then, in that situation. If you just have 1,000 people showing up at the park, no one has exclusive use of anything, and it's first come, first serve all around
Right.
and whatnot. So it just, each of those situations is different. And again, at the end of the day, the reason we would want to have this in there in some way or another is to encourage people to connect with us so that they can have a great
Right.
experience at the end of the day, so.
I appreciate the spirit of that, I really do. But practically speaking, this is in the city code. So unless we're expecting that private citizens are regularly perusing the city code like we are, it's an enforcement thing on the flip side, which is, oh, you didn't do that, there are consequences to not having done that, like we're kicking you out or we're fining you. So if the city, I mean, unless the city is passing out flyers, which would be wonderful to say, are you thinking about using the park? Here's how you should do it. I mean, if we're talking about the knowledge piece, if people just show up at the park, if I organize on Twitter and people show up on the park, I don't see how the city's gonna know about it, and it's gonna definitely be an enforcement thing on the flip side. So if someone wants to plan, pretty much everyone knows, I would say, generally, if you wanna reserve a shelter, you have to reserve a shelter. And that means I gotta talk to someone at the city and go through the appropriate permits and the appropriate process. And then at that point, we have the discovery of, oh yeah, I'm gonna have 1,000 people. And they'd say, well, that's maybe not a good idea at this park because the shelter holds 100 people. Maybe you should go somewhere else. Or, hey, have you thought about the bathrooms? So I don't see why the city needs to regulate the number of people specifically outside of, I get if we have a shelter, number of people can't be there based off health and safety, but to Godin's point, people are gonna self-regulate. Because sometimes I drive by Crystal Lake, I see it's completely full, and I just keep on driving. Go right to Lackawanna instead, because there's not people there.
My suggestion is that avoid the number because that's a very difficult one to even know from park to park and all that because it's not the same in each park. And if there's a problem that develops in the future, at that time the city hall can think about it. Till now, I don't know whether there has been any problem, but almost all special events with food and music and all that gets a permit anyway. At that time, you can ask there what is the number, expected number. If you're using something in Nicollet Park, you expect whatever that number is. If you want to do that, you can do that, so that they can, city can plan. But till then, for, like you suggested, protected activity speech. So let's not get into that unless there is a problem. If there's a problem, then then the city can address that at that time and see how we can avoid it in the future.
I still don't read it as prohibitive, even with the number on there. I still find it as a good way for the community to be able to manage its resources. So I guess that's where I'm looking for that number. I plan, corporate gatherings in the city of St. Paul at numerous parks, and whether the size has been 50 or I think one of them was 300 and some, I've had to call the city and make sure that it was okay with the parks, and I didn't find that intrusive at all. I do think what you're saying, the call out on Twitter, we're in a new era where that can happen. And I still don't think this shouldn't be prohibitive of that happening. But I do think that there's a certain number that we should be proactive enough to say, hey, as a citizen, I'm gonna be conscious to make sure I'm following the rules.
So I would counter that and say, right now there's 5 things it looks like that are regulated. Public sales or food and merchandise, this is on page 22. Private use of any portion of the park. Tents and or temporary structures that are anchored in the ground and are larger than 10 by 10. Signs or announcements, amplified sounds. So we should probably regulate just there.
Well, and rereading it while I was listening to this too, number 2 almost seems to really take care of it no matter what the number. Private use of any portion of the park. If I want to actually use with 5 of my friends that a section of the park, whether it's a structure or it's the soccer field or something, that already tells me I'm planning to privately use it. We want full access. I need a special event permit.
Interesting. That's a good call.
So I think, I agree now. I'm rereading it.
I see that.
And I think that it does cause less confusion than when you talk about numbers, because that is the hard part, like which kind of event and how many people are really gonna be, needing more use out of it. If you're just gonna say private use of any portion of the park, that's.
Makes sense to me.
That's broader, yeah. So I'm good with this.
Okay. So the motion on the table that's been moved and seconded is to add the word after in permit in the one section, the special event application permit, to clarify what they need to get. And then from 8.5.14, we're gonna take A and 1 and put it under 8.5.4. And then the first paragraph that's not enumerated, just 8.5.14, that would just disappear. Okay, so calling the vote. Would all those in favor of that motion please say aye and raise your hand? Aye.
Wait.
Hold on.
Okay,
Put your hands back up, please.
all right. So 3 of us,
Okay.
all right? And then all those opposed, say nay and raise your hand.
Nay.
Donna, are you voting no?
I would rather see it written up and moved first before I say I like it or don't. I'd like to see the language together versus, I'm a person that's in many ways visual. So I'd like to see it to get how it goes and how it reads, if it makes sense at that point. Before then just putting it together in here and saying, yeah, go with it. I'd rather have time to think about that.
Can I, so I'll suggest, the nays, please raise your hand if you are nay. Okay, so there's 3 nays, there's 1 that abstained. What would you like to say on it?
I'm kind of on the nay, and I'm the same way with Donna. I want to know exactly how it is worded before I can go truly yea or nay on it.
Okay, so then, how about a consensus? Could we ask the city to draft proposed language, bring it to us next time, and we can actually have a final vote on whether we want to adopt it, or whether we want to discuss it more or strike it? Is that okay with people?
Yep. Yes.
That'd be good.
Okay, thank you.
Good discussion.
Was. Okay, so that was page 26. Page 27, designated areas, the word parking lots is added. And at the bottom, boat was substituted for the word watercraft. And then finally, on page 28, the violations and penalties has been amended to be consistent with other sections of the code, which talks about it's a misdemeanor and could be punishable by fine and/or imprisonment.
Good question. Sorry
Yes.
to back up for a second as I just reread that bottom of 27.
Yep.
Since we switched watercraft at the front of it, do we want to switch the boat in the second line to watercraft as well? Are we broadening?
That's a good catch. Okay, anything else on page 28? Okay, so on to page 29, and you'll notice the magenta ribbon that says this is where we ended last time. So, on to new business. Thank you everyone for the great discussions we've had. So again, kind of what has been our model to follow is we'll look through each pages, red is deleted, green is new addition. If there's questions, we'll call those out. So starting just with street lighting, Member Ward asked, it looks like the city is expanding its authority to determine that existing streets may require lighting installations. Is this correct? And what is the city's intention here?
I can respond to that.
Please.
So, that's not the intention. That first part of purpose, I think, was drafted just to kind of have an opening to the street lighting section. We have a street lighting policy that was adopted in 2011 that lays out a lot more of the detail about our street lighting. And the policy is new construction, new subdivisions, new commercial, they are required to install street lighting with their project. We don't have a ton of new subdivisions, but if we were to, they would have to have street lighting. Any other cases, like your residential neighborhood where there's not street lighting that exists today, the residents of that neighborhood would have to petition the city to install the streetlights. And then through that petition process, they would be responsible for being assessed or pay for it. And that's in that section 8-6-2 pursuant to section 429, which is the state statute on special assessments. And so in the policy, it's policy 5.080, it's really detailed about our street lighting. And this is just, I think, referencing as a bigger picture and then establishing the ability to have a street lighting utility so that people who have streetlights in their neighborhoods or they have continuous street lighting, pay a fee to maintain and keep those streetlights functioning.
So I think what I heard, correct me if I got this wrong, is this gives the city the ability to do a special assessment if and establish street lighting, but it'd be if they're petitioned to do so. So the city's not planning on bringing in new lights necessarily.
For new streetlights. And then further on, it talks about the streetlight utility fee, which has been ongoing for many, many years. So that's not new. I think it's just relocated in the code.
Okay.
But that first paragraph, the purpose, I think was written just to have an opening to what is, so there's no changes to the intent of the city when it comes to streetlights or how we are going to handle installing new ones.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because the process is simple. When they redid my streets, the city asked if you wanted streetlights. Yeah, guess what happened? No. We just got our street assessments at the same time. So we're like, no, we're good. We'll leave our outside lights on. So yeah, to that is exactly how the neighborhood worked at the time, is everybody came back and said, no, we're good right now.
Yep.
So it's nice to hear that, for that part of it, so people don't sit there and panic. that all of
At
a
the
sudden-
time we're doing the road project, we do proactively ask, because that's a good time to install them at that same time. It's the road's open, you're doing construction anyway, so we do proactively ask at that point, but generally we don't. In just a regular neighborhood, if you want street lighting, it's more the petition process. The neighborhood has to want it, and they have to come forward and ask. In the policy, it's that 60% of the adjacent neighbors have to sign the petition, or 20% have to ask for the city to go out and poll or do a ballot. So there's a whole really detailed policy for that. That's not in the code.
Gotcha.
Nice.
Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
So that's like it's page 30. The next comment is this fund, if this fund is established and the city requires installation in existing areas, I think the city should pay for it out of the fund if it's in the, quote, best interests of the residents of the city. Assessing benefiting property owners for this isn't right or fair if the city should have required it in the first place. In general, if the city wants a new installation in a city area, the city should pay for it.
So we aren't going to be putting them in without the neighborhood asking us to do it.
Perfect. And because the neighbors would be asking for it, they would be the ones assessing.
Yes. They'd be,
Assessed it.
they'd have to be paying for it.
Okay, makes sense. Let's jump to page 31. And so there's some slight wording changes here about fees being collected. And then we can flip the page to, looks like 39 is the next time there's any new text. Everything else in between there is deleted. Are there any questions? Was this merged all water surface management chapters and renamed chapter 8-7 water body? So does that mean it's been moved? Is that?
I merged them all because a lot of it within the chapters was very redundant.
Okay.
So I merged all the chapters together.
Gotcha. Okay, so we've already seen, for example, the definition of watercraft because that has been moved to earlier in the title.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so to page 39. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. It's right here in the title. Excuse me. So on page 40, question from Member Payne, should we define motorized vehicles or motorboat? And the answer is I don't think it's necessary. I think that was Jared that said that. Okay. Since daytime and nighttime are defined terms, shouldn't they be capitalized throughout? Okay, that sounds more like an editing thing. We'll move to page 41 unless anyone has points they'd like to call out. Member Payne, again, doesn't specifically prohibit the use of internal combustion propelled vehicles. Is that the intent? So the sentence is, upon request, the city may allow the use of remote controlled internal combustion engines at the specified location.
I think, so earlier it says the operation of motorized vehicles, motorboats powered by electric motors or watercrafts are only allowed during the daytime. No electric trolling motors, no boating whatsoever is allowed. So this is for smaller lakes. And so I haven't ever I mean, Garrett, I don't know if you've ever dealt with this, but I mean, in my 20 years here, I've never had anybody request to use a remote controlled internal combustion engine on any of our smaller water bodies. So there's two things, right? Either they're doing it and they don't know that this rule exists and no one's complaining about it, or it just doesn't happen. But I'm assuming it was a setup at one time, because I think in Bloomington, there's some lakes that, or ponds that have like remote control races. And I'm assuming, I don't know when this was written, but my assumption for it to be in here this specifically is that maybe there was a time when something like that was happening in Burnsville on water bodies that were too small, or the noise from them was causing issues, and so the city put it in here. So, I mean, it does, in my opinion, this does eliminate internal combustion remote control engines. So, I don't know, I think that's the intent of it, not maybe for regular watercraft.
Because that's regulated elsewhere already
correct, yeah.
in this chapter. Okay. I'll assume that clears it up. So moving on to page 42, just moved some clarifying language. And then it looks like the definitions section has had a lot of things deleted because it's already in statute or in the Minnesota rules. And so we can skip to page 49, administration. And then right-of-way, occupancy, and registration. So right-of-way, occupancy, no privately owned structure. And then my question is, what is considered a structure? Is a planter box a structure?
So we consider structures to be something that's semi-permanent, that's not easily movable. So a small planter box, should the city have to come in and do a project, either a utility project or street project, and your small planter box, we could go to you and say you need to move it, you can easily move it, that's fine. If you had giant boulders, landscape, big rocks, you had to require some sort of machinery to move, then that's not allowed.
So if I had a planter box that was the size of this table, so 6 by 3, is it easily movable? Sure. I mean, not with one hand, but what would the city's take on that be?
You know, a lot of this is case by case, but I mean, people are putting planters in the right of way all the time. It's when there are big structures like retaining walls, big boulder blocks, things that are difficult to move, things that would require an expense to the city should you have to move it, or things like if there's a retaining wall and it's holding back your house and we have to like get in there, your retaining wall should have been pushed back outside of the right of way. So that a planter box is not our concern. If you made a giant planter box, and we would say you have to move that because we're doing a 2-story planter box. We'd have to talk about, you know, what are the repercussions of, should we have to do a city project, or should a private utility come in and need to do some work, or is there a hydrant nearby? You know, there's all these kind of scenarios. So we say a privately owned structure is something that's semi-permanent, hard to move.
Okay, thank you. On to page 50, there's a note about removing not required cup for small cells in row. Okay, gonna move past that. And right away. Okay, so, and what is, Jen, could you explain what the registration is for? It's if I wanted to install something more permanent?
Right, so typically it's gonna be a utility company who's coming in to install a new utility or do repairs to their utility. So we need a registration so we can get their insurance, and sometimes we hold a bond if it's under the road. The registration just lets us know who's occupying the right of way and for what purpose.
Thank you. Skipping to page 53. Permits requirements, and it looks like there's a comment that some of the language has been moved. to be included with the obstructions permit for clarity. And please stop me if anyone has questions. I'm just gonna keep moving through the code. The next time I see comments are page 58. So this is issuance of permit and conditions. The city shall issue or deny a permit within 90 business days. Member Ward says, should we say acceptable completed application? Oh, and I see that the deny language has handled that. The member Stockwell says, this states the city has 90 days to issue the permit. Okay, so I think the denial piece has rendered that moot. Okay. Page 59. Let's see. Okay. Looks like there's more comments. All right, the next time I see comments are page 79. Number of bus benches. Might be the second time we talk about numbers.
Let me get there and then I can respond to that.
So as you're pulling that up, the question is, there shall be no more than 60 bus benches within the city. And several of us were wondering, why set a number? Who cares?
Okay, so I wasn't here when that number was established. What was happening, my understanding is the history was, there's a difference between a bus bench, which is a private structure that is used primarily for advertising, and a transit shelter, which is installed by MVTA or Metro Transit. There's a difference, and that's in the definitions, and so Erica, I don't know if we want to put those were deleted from the definitions, we might want to put those back, so that distinguishing feature is, one is private and the other is a public transit agency. So what was happening was, because the bus benches were used for primarily advertising and revenue, bus benches were being put in places where there were no buses, in medians, in anywhere, because it became more of like a mini bench-sized billboard. And so there was regulations put into place to limit where those could be. Some of those changes that were made were to make it had to be where there was a transit stop. If MVTA or another transit agency said, we want to put a shelter in, you can't have this advertising bus bench anymore, we're moving you out. And 60, the number is, that's the exact number we have right now. So adding no more to the fleet of bus benches that are allowed. That was a determination that was made the last time the code was updated, was that we didn't want to add more bus benches to the numbers. But there are all of those other criteria that that were changed to allow them to not be in strange places, that they have to be bus relevant.
So, are there more than 60 bus stop locations in the city?
Yes.
Okay, but we just can't have more than 60 bus benches. To me, it seems like we could eliminate the number because the issue at hand was where people were putting them all over. And since they've already been constrained to say that they have to be bus stop adjacent, and if an MVTA stop is there, transit shelter's there, then you can't go there. To me, seems like it kind of handles the issue. Do people agree with that? That eliminating the cap at 60 is fine because we have these other requirements regulating the time, place, and manner?
Do we need to say just there should be no new bus benches, like beyond the ones that already exist? Like, or is that kind of already really covered?
That's the 60. So if you're saying
Yeah.
you're okay with having 61 or no limit, we would take the number out. But 60 is what we have right now. So no more additions could be made. People, they could move them to other locations. If, say, example, the transit authority wants to put a shelter and there's a bus bench, we kick them out, they can move their bench somewhere else right now. But otherwise, there's no new, is what it says today.
So if you got rid of one and went down to 59, would you allow one to be put back in place?
Somewhere
for the
else,
other
yeah,
one?
yeah.
Okay.
That's how it's currently written. But some of, to your point, some of that had been cleaned up by limiting where they could be. I think there were some issues with them showing up in county right-of-way, which that we aren't allowed to permit those. That's a county permitted thing. I think that's covered now. So up to the members of the task force, if you want to eliminate the number, it's not something, I think that we're obsessed about or something is what it says in here. Why are you so obsessed? We're not obsessed. We just, that's what it was before, and the reason was to keep the number the same.
So bus benches can only be in the city right of way, and specifically at a bus.
At a
stop.
mapped bus stop, and so if the bus stops change, they need to move their bus bench as well.
Okay, so this might be like the equivalent of you're driving down, 150th or 140th, and the bus stops there, there's no place to sit. Someone could say, I want a permit. I'm gonna pay for the bus bench because I'm gonna put in my advertising. And it has to be to certain specifications, but it's in the city right away, so it could go there. I don't have a problem if people want to put in more bus benches, assuming they only go into the places they're constrained.
I don't have a problem with it either, not with all that
It's in the
coverage.
right,
yeah.
definition and places. I don't know, yeah.
Okay,
I know many bus stops where there is no benches right now today, and in some cases, I wish there were.
Yeah. That makes sense.
okay. So it seems like the consensus I'm seeing is that we feel comfortable removing the limit of precisely 60 bus benches, or any limit on their number, because we have all the other limits saying where they can and cannot exist. Okay. On to page 80, advertising signs on bus benches. A question, who decides what is an obscenity? Cole, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, it's a good question. What this is referring to, and it previously said obscene, immoral, or anything related, revised it to say obscenities. What that's referring to is the category of unprotected speech of obscenity, and that's been specifically defined and narrowed in case law. For the sake of clarity, I could reference, there's a Minnesota statute that provides a specific definition, and the Burnsville Code actually does reference that elsewhere. So I could reference that. I could add some revisions there if you want that for clarity. But that's referring to whatever the legal landscape has determined to be unprotected speech for being an obscenity,
Okay,
is a short answer.
thank you. A question I have, so no advertising of the following items are allowed, any age-regulated or illegal substances. So, age-regulated would be alcohol, which we've stricken, so we would be saying you cannot advertise for marijuana or other controlled substances or tobacco. Is that right? Am I reading that correctly?
That's how that would be applied, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. And then there was another question, what is the city approval for? If the approval has to do with the message's content, then maybe there are constitutional issues. Okay,
That was deleted, right? The all advertising shall be subject to the approval of the city was deleted.
it looks like it was deleted, yes.
Yeah, I added that comment and I struck that language going through here. I guess I wanted to ask a member of the staff who might know, what is the purpose of the approval? Because if it is, like I said in the comment, if it's content-based, then there's a problem that could arise. If it's just about meeting certain restrictions, I think they're already spelt out right above here, the size and the can't say certain things. So does anybody know what that function that serves?
No, we don't look at what they're advertising right now when we're doing the approval, so they're getting a permit to have the location, and then before 60 max, but changing that to the city, but we haven't been reviewing the advertising.
Are they the ones required to maintain it?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question about this, the number 3, 10A3, and it just, certain words that would be distraction, be a distraction. What about images that might be a distraction?
Could you think of an example?
The-
Like a stop sign? I mean, that would probably have the word stop on it.
Right,
but-
or the World Trade Center on 9/11, I don't know, something that
Okay,
might
so
be
something
distressing
graphic.
to somebody, and
Sure.
I mean, that's a very bad example, but something that the image of would be a distraction. When it might not be obscene, but it might still be a distraction and cause problems with traffic, maybe.
That leads me to a question too that kind of is sort of in line with that, but you can't have a bus bench advertisement that is moving, right? Like actively, like electronic.
We don't have any right now. There's no power to
Because that would
them.
be distracting too, and to your point here.
Yeah, there is none currently. They're static and just,
Sure,
but, I mean,
But they could be.
they could be.
If someone wants to
interesting.
give them battery power or.
Yeah.
Solar.
So at that point, would they qualify as small billboards?
Might, yeah, might. I mean, we haven't seen it so far.
I sense a cottage industry.
I think there could be something that could be distracting, I suppose. How would it come about if it were to be later? Like if no one's looking at the advertising right now and say something gets put up that say has stop on it or something, is it just a matter of complaint and then
Yes.
it's, okay.
So someone would have to tell us that because we aren't going to the currently 60, potentially millions of bus benches.
Yeah, and
We're not going to each one to see, so it would be complaint-based.
Okay.
And then we would go and check it out. And same with the repair of them. So if they're in disrepair.
Yeah.
And it's not our responsibility, but someone were to call the city, we'd reach out to them and say they have to get it fixed.
That makes sense. I wouldn't be opposed if we, wanted to include a word in there that would talk about like an image or something, I guess. That could be something valid, but I don't know.
Or are you saying does symbol cover picture?
Yeah, I could, right? I could. The symbol could definitely be just an image, like that
Right.
was a very similar word, so it could be that. That's true.
Michelle?
Chair, that's exactly what I was gonna say, to add picture or image to the
Image.
definition.
Yeah.
Okay. So any other word, phrase, picture, image, symbol, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. I assume, and maybe this is not needed, but would we be concerned about like a very reflective surface that might cause a distraction like that? Would that be something that we could add to the language?
Non-reflective?
A holographic bench.
Yeah, no. Glow in the dark.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Those could
Yeah,
be
that's
distracting.
Very. Yeah. Okay, what do we do in our spare time, Sarah?
Cole, if we wanted to make sure that people weren't doing glow-in-the-dark benches or a mirror bench, basically, that's going to maybe cause people to see a car where there isn't one, how would you recommend we do that in language?
I think you could probably draft it to be a little broader in the sense that instead of saying, other word, phrase, symbol that might interfere with, mislead, or distract traffic, because that last part might interfere with, mislead, or distract traffic is the key. So you could say something to the effect of, or form, which might interfere with, mislead, or distract traffic, or something like that. You could maybe even just say depiction instead of symbol, image, etc.
Okay.
You could maybe say depiction or form, which might interfere with
Okay.
or distract
So
traffic.
any other word, depiction, or form which might interfere with, mislead, or distract traffic?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Then I think that takes us through the end of this, because I'm not seeing any other comments on that, which would give us time to review, I think, the next section, which is pretty cool, Title IX, right?
It is. Chair, I do have somebody online that wishes to speak to Title IX.
Okay, so the title ahead of us. Could we distribute the paper and then?
Come on. There we go.
Yeah, so I need to do that still. I will do that, thank you. Okay, so before we proceed to 9, we're gonna do the questions and comments from the task force and public. Item 5 of the agenda is questions and comments from the task force related to Title IX traffic regulation. And looking through this, you can see there are a couple of emails. And one is from a person named Tom. I'm gonna take a second to read this. I didn't realize that was in tonight's agenda. If that's okay with people, I'm looking at page 87. And then there's another email as well on page 88. Okay, it appears to me at least all of the comments are about them supporting there not being overnight parking.
Oh, there's one that does support
One does support.
overnight parking in heart of the city.
And that's the one from Tom. Okay. Okay,
So I just had a comment on the overnight parking in heart of the city. Right now, the city is undergoing a heart of the city parking study.
okay.
And we are planning on concluding it this fall. We'll be going to the council in the November work session to talk about findings. Only part of that study is, the overnight parking. It's looking at, parking availability and things. It's a bigger study, but we are looking at 2 to 6 parking restrictions and, just studying it with this, consultant-led study. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that there's something underway that we're looking at it further.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, you said that we had a person that would like to speak to Title IX.
Yes, so I'm ready to move on to
Yep,
item number 6
public-
then?
yeah.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess before I move on from 5, does anyone have any questions specifically about the submitted comments and questions here. Okay, so then on to item 6, which is review the traffic regulations.
I don't have a name. Would you like to unmute and turn your video on?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, please state your name and your address.
I don't have a webcam on my computer, but yeah, Abdi, and I live at 145 Grand Avenue, Neon, Burnsville apartment, in Burnsville. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on the 2 to 6 a.m. Parking. So at every given night, there are about like 20 to 30 cars parked on the street because given the number of apartments we have and the parking space available on the apartment complex itself, it's not enough for everyone. So that's why like we have about like 20 to 30 cars on a given night parked outside. So I'm not sure the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. are we taking that out of the books? Is that like going to be a permanent thing, or is it just during snow season? Do we know about that? Because I read the thing and it doesn't stay. It looks like it's going to be permanent.
My knowledge is it is the current regulation that there is no on-street or roadway parking between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. With only a few exceptions. That was the current rule, and right now, that's what we're going to discuss, whether or not to keep that the current rule or not.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So yeah, that was my first point, and then the second point is if we decide to keep that rule, like, not parking on the streets from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., it might be a good idea for signage, more like, it's going to be hard to put the sign on every single street, but maybe kind of, signs at the entry points of the city. I'm not sure if that's already there, but it will be helpful to let people know. But yeah, that's all I have, and thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, let's jump in to chapter 9. So on page 94, private road or driveway, every way or place in private ownership and used for vehicular traffic by the owner and those having express or implied permission from the owner, but not by other persons, except any shopping center, parking lot, or roadway, any other place used for vehicular parking for or access to any business establishment or public school. So, the comment is, I'm a little confused by the second half, where we veer from statute. So, Cole, would you like to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull the statute up here to see what exactly the comment is referring to. Is this on this provision, or like this
Yeah.
paragraph there?
Yep. So I think the first thing is that it's saying it's per statute. So per Minnesota statute, that the definition of private road or driveway is derived, but then Jared's confused why apparently it must veer from statute, except any shopping center. So
Yeah, let me try.
shopping centers and or business establishments or public schools are considered street or highway, not private road or driveway.
Yeah, I guess I can't speak to why that's in there. I mean, this is the way that it was written, but yeah, the statute, pulled up the definition here, subdivision 57, there would essentially just be a period right after persons. So it's that blue section that he highlighted.
That's not in the statute, it's added specifically.
Correct.
Okay. So do you think that having, to some degree, as a person who's not a lawyer, it seems like clarifying that shopping center parking lots are not private roadways, but are actually considered street or highway, seems like a meaningful distinction. Is that I assume that's a valid distinction, or is it only valid because that's what our code says?
It's valid because that's what the code says.
Okay.
Yeah, and you certainly can add that part to the definition
Okay,
if you think that that's, reasonable policy.
all right. So I think that would be a pretty substantive change if we said that shopping center parking lots were not private road or driveway. Because if they were private road or driveway, then basically people could park there at any time, right? Okay. I don't know if I have an opinion. I mean, that's the way it is right now. Whether or not that definition should substantively change.
I think we either leave it like that, or then we have to then change the wording later on, to probably accommodate for it. So I'm okay with leaving it as is.
Okay. So I think Jared made that comment, so maybe we'll let Jared get back to us next time as to what he's thinking. In A, then Jared recommended keeping prima facie as a legal standard rather than self-evident. Vicky was curious about adding an exception if the vehicle had been reported stolen or is later discovered to have been stolen. I think that's a pretty reasonable exception if it's not your car anymore, to not also get the parking fine on top of it.
Yeah.
Does anyone have an issue with adding that, adding a clause to A?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. So basically, we're making an exception for if it was reported stolen or found, proven to be stolen, later discovered to have been stolen, that is would you say that should be a justification, or how would you say that in lawyerese?
I'd have to take a closer look at it,
Okay.
but we can give draft language, put
Perfect.
this in here and redline it for you guys to take a look at next time.
Okay, thank you.
Because when I was up north, my car happened to die it had offset parking, odd even, so it died on the day I was okay, but the next day I was not going to be.
Oh, no.
So I had to call the police and make a report and give them my plate number, so when they did come through and enforce, they didn't tell me on that part of it because of the parking, how it was on there.
Moving to page 95, Sarah, it looks like you had made a comment that after all the years of this being in place, is the city seeing an increase in violations of vehicles parked between 2 and 6? Are there certain areas in the city where we could remove this rule as certain residential areas? Or is there certain street criteria that would allow it to be removed? I'm aware of residents not liking this as it comes up and get in conversations. Or should it just be seasonal, paraphrasing there? Anything else you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, just more like, again, I've lived here a long time and I see it, and there's certain neighborhoods where, you kind of get annoyed by it, maybe just because you don't have that problem, but maybe there's a couple of friends staying over for the night and someone's parking out front. And there's maybe one too many cars that don't fit in the driveway. So, you're kind of dealing with that, but I am not aware on a general basis, one way or the other, how bad this is for the city. Like, it would be nice to hear what kind of an issue this truly
Pain in the
is.
neck for certain areas and properties, and the hard part of it is you gotta report it between 2 and 6 in the morning.
Yeah,
That's the most difficult part, and I would never make this seasonal.
yeah,
I'm
sure.
sorry, ever, ever, ever. Either you do it or you don't. Because trying to say, well, from this date to this date, you can't, well, no, people aren't gonna get that. It's just either you do or you don't, is my opinion on this part. But it's tough, but it needs to be, because you have a problem where you have households, and no offense, where they have 10 cars and they don't even park in their garage because you see the door open, and then they're out on the street. And there are some streets that don't have shoulders or don't have extra room to get around, not just plowing, just driving the streets. So that's a very difficult thing to get through, and I realize it's a pain. My thing would be if I have guests, I'm calling the police or calling somebody and saying, hey, I got people staying, they're gonna be on the street overnight, here's the plate number. But this is a really tough situation, but I'm not one for getting rid of, because there's enough of the few that are gonna run with it
Sure.
for the vehicles on the street.
Yeah, that was the purpose of my question. I just wanted to discuss as a whole.
Michelle?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair. To Donna's point, it's not enforced unless somebody's complaining.
Complaining, right.
So if somebody's doing this habitually, then that's where you're gonna get the complaint. Another thing is that, yes, we do have a temporary permit process where you go onto the police website and you can type your name and the vehicle plate and whatever in there, and then you have a little permit for up to 3 days that you can park on the street. And this is what people use a lot of times, like when they redo their driveway, or they know they're gonna have people coming to stay for the weekend or that kind of thing. So it's you know.
Michelle, is that instantaneous? Like you automatically just, if you put in the information on the website, it pops out and
You can print out the permit and go put it
It's
in your
right-
vehicle
okay.
right
Yep.
there. Mm-hmm.
There's no.
Yep. I
Now,
have-
obviously, if like it's snowing and there's a snow emergency, then it doesn't apply. But aside from that,
Yes.
I think that, because we've talked about the parking thing prematurely a few times, and the fire department's position has been that having the boulevards clear in the evening makes it easier to navigate trucks down the streets, because not all streets are wide enough to have a fire truck and people parking on both sides. And the police department have said that they found that for like neighborhood watch, not having cars parked on the street, there's less car break-ins, but also it's easier to tell when someone who doesn't normally live there is parked there.
Captain Stinger was going to be here at the next meeting
Okay.
to help us.
I'll give an example from my park where I work. We have a policy, and it's just as difficult at times to do, of no parking on the streets. That policy came before I started about 15 years ago now, because there was a fire in the park. And at the time they allowed parking on the street, that meant the fire truck had to go a different route. And that few minutes was the difference between that house being able to be put out or losing the house. So that's why our park at the time, many, many years ago, said, hey, no, we're not doing park on the street except for medical people, or those exceptions, or 5 to 10 minutes on that. But that's a good part of it, and there's examples of that around why that is, and these trucks are bigger. These fire trucks have not gotten any smaller, and that equipment is bigger, so that's where this gets to be quite important for going through on it.
So is there anyone who wants to see the 2 to 6 restriction lifted? Okay.
No, just curious was all that was.
I would almost like to see them be able to enforce it without calling, but.
Well, they can. It's just the
Yeah.
police's policy
Yeah.
that unless someone has
Yeah.
called about it.
I have a question on that. When they're the 2 AM to 6 AM, yes, I want to keep that, definitely. But when they are plowing, they have, let's say they start plowing at 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning. If the citizens or neighbors don't call it in, can the plow drivers, I know when they're plowing, they don't
Yep.
get the house number.
No,
but can
they call it in
They call
and
it
it gets
in.
ticketed
They
or
do call
towed.
They do call it in.
Yeah.
'Cause
But I
have-
consistently see them going around to certain cars on my block every winter, and they've never,
Never ticketed them, huh?
well, if they have, they're paying a daily fine then, because they're never moved, they're there all the time. So that's why I'm wondering, do the plow drivers do call it in, though?
That's my understanding that they certainly can. That'd be a good question for the Public Works Director, what their specific policy is.
Okay.
Moving to page 96, I know we're almost out of time, but if we only have like 4 more pages, and half of these pages are deletions, so if we could stay an extra 5-10 minutes, I think we'd be in a really awesome spot. There was a question from Sarah about, does this conflict with number 11 above? Jared responded, no, this is the 48-hour consecutive versus 2 to 6. A question from Shelley on no person shall park any vehicle upon any avenue or street or any area in the city in such manner as to interfere with snow removal or street maintenance of the said streets or highways. And she said that any area in the city seems to be too broad. Would that include parking lots and other places that may be legitimate, even if there's snow to remove? And I think that it's actually not legitimate to park in a shopping parking lot because it's considered a public. It's not given the private exemption. Is that correct, Cole? From our,
What's the section you're looking at?
so I'm looking at 96 and specifically 15 here. And Shelley's point of any area in the city seems to be too broad because that would include parking lots or other places that may be legitimate, assuming legitimate to park in, even if there's snow to remove. And it seems like that actually I think that's wrong because it's not legitimate to park overnight at a shopping center parking lot because that's defined as a, what's the word? Street highway or?
It is exempted from being considered a private road or driveway, and it is included as a street or highway under the current definition.
I think that Shelley's not here to speak to that more. Maybe we could wait for further discussion on that. And then I think that would also go nicely with if Jared gives us clarification on public versus private.
Yeah.
Michelle?
And I think that when we're looking at this and it's talking about interfering with snow removal or street maintenance, we're specifically talking about city snow removal and street maintenance, not necessarily private. If somebody in a private parking lot wants to allow cars there and it doesn't interfere with their snow removal process, then I guess the city's not going to be enforcing that for them.
I think that's really comes back down to, are these public shopping centers, should they really be not considered private? Because if they are considered, right now they're not considered private, and because they're not considered private, then, I mean, I understand your point of the city snow removal, but I guess it just says snow removal. Would that automatically imply that it must be the city's snow removal?
It just says snow removal or street maintenance of the said streets and highways, so it's pretty broadly. That's pretty broad. I guess that says, it just means broadly snow removal, the way it's written at least.
Okay.
Yeah, you could make it more specific if you wanted to.
So would that mean, though, that if I had a public snow removal company and I go to a parking lot and that there's someone that's parked there, that basically, because that public parking lot is considered a public street and I'm here to do snow removal, that person who parked there is in violation of item 15 of the city code?
If the person is parked on a street that interferes with snow removal.
Well, it says upon any avenue or street or any area in the city. So any area in the city
Very broad.
would be the public parking lots as well, which we've already defined as being not private roads.
It is written very broadly. Particularly because of the last part, which says, or any area in the city.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that catch-all language basically means that it applies everywhere and probably should be revised.
Okay.
So once we clarify the public-private part, that should help clarify this part.
Yeah, I think maybe that would be something for council to review how that language should be maybe brought in. Okay, I'm gonna skip the comment from Jared about eliminating the evidentiary piece because we've deleted B. And then, if a police officer finds that a motor vehicle or trailer has been parked or stopped in violation, the officer is authorized to provide for the removal and impounding of the vehicle or trailer. But a note is that this is rarely done unless it's impeding snow removal or is a safety issue, okay? looking at 97, nothing standing out, into 98, into 99 as well. Can this city or state install speed cameras?
I think there's some, I don't know, I'd have to defer to the attorney here. I think there's been some issues with that, right?
Yeah,
There has been in other parts of the Twin Cities issues with those cameras and.
Are they lawful?
I'd have to look closer into it. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to look into the,
Well,
Current status
I
of
would
it.
sure love to see language that says the city will not install speed cameras. But I think if it's not legal, then not really relevant. Okay. I think really that takes us to just page 102. And this is, a person operating a skateboard or skate equipment upon a roadway shall not ride more than 2 abreast and shall not impede the normal and reasonable movement of traffic, and on a laned highway shall ride within a single lane. And Sarah, would you like to comment on that, please?
I am just curious how this came about, I guess, for one thing, but also like how does it apply and is it necessary anymore? Maybe it was for a certain situation, maybe it was historical. It's very specific. So I'm gonna totally paraphrase what my big long paragraph is there on the side, but I'm really just kind of surprised that there is a skateboard park now. There wasn't one many years ago, so I'm just curious, like, if that is a real problem, because I haven't run across like 2 skateboarders in the street.
More than 2, right?
Right, yeah, right, exactly, more than 2. So, I don't know, just curious if it's relevant anymore, was really my question.
Oh, I've run into it.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I run into it more in my park, and I've run into it in the street where they're out there, and if they start doing this little dippy thing,
Oh, sure,
that's where it gets to be, and they're like, well, we're just cruising along.
yeah.
Yep. But that would impede the normal and reasonable movement of traffic.
Well, and I guess that, yeah, I guess as I read through this before, I was looking at like the state, isn't there something already there within the state statutes kind of about this, and it seemed like there was. So I don't really know if that's a legal thing that just, needs to be clarified, is kind of what I was getting towards. Maybe it just doesn't need to be said here because the state's already kind of addressing it.
I've also seen those ball ones kind of running through
Oh,
too.
yeah, yes, those are different these
Kind of
days.
skateboardy like, but
They're
it's
like
more of a ball,
self-propelled.
self-propelled.
The one wheel.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
Yep.
So how does that apply, was it the other part, I suppose, but,
So a question for council is, I would assume anyone on the roadway, period, has to do so in a manner that doesn't impede the normal and reasonable movement of traffic, whether bicycle, scooter, skateboard, one wheel,
Right.
hovercraft. Do we need to enumerate that they can't do that? Or is that already covered by state statute?
I would want to look at the statute first
Okay,
before answering that question entirely, just to see how it applies, make sure the language covers all the bases that you want to cover.
okay.
Because alternatively, if it doesn't, you'll want to make sure that all of this is square to cover that. But
Right.
I would be surprised if it isn't already enumerated
Okay.
in the statute.
And to Donna's point about the one wheel, they're not right now being regulated because they're not a skateboard. So I think that maybe removing that rule, if we're already covered by people not being able to impede the flow of traffic, seems pretty reasonable to me. So if you'll do some research on that. All right. Well, excellent work, everyone. Thank you for staying a little longer. That takes us to the end of Title IX. And now, Michelle, if I have this right, this was the last title that we needed to review, right?
That's correct.
So next time in September, we're going to come back for a final review of Titles 8 and 9. And assuming we get through those and pass that, then will that be officially our last meeting, or does the city council need to get back to us? Well, I guess we do have some other work packages that we need to review the language in 7, so we might be going a couple more times. How does the city plan to tell us You're all done. Thank you.
I'll let you know when they let me know.
Okay. Could you ask the council about
Certainly.
how the dissolution should
Certainly.
happen?
I'm glad that we got through all of this tonight. I wasn't expecting it, so I didn't anticipate that question just yet.
Sure. All right. So the next code review task force meeting will be September 27th at 5:30 p.m. here in the council chambers. Meetings will typically be held on the last Wednesday night of each month. There is no homework. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.